This one is going to be a bit different. It's not so much a theoretical lesson, it's more some advice that I'm going to give you about traveling in China and being in China. So this is more like a one-on-one teacher to student conversation, much more than me trying to explain a lot of theoretical stuff to you. Because what we're going to discuss is the need for flexibility when you go to China, when you travel around in China. So I do advise you that you get yourself some Chinese tea, just like I do, because it's extremely relaxing, and that's what you're going to need for this lesson, because you will need to learn how to relax and go with the flow. Now, the thing that I want to explain is how you, like I said, need to have some form of flexibility when you go to China. When you do go to some of the bigger cities, and especially if you go to Shanghai, you might get the impression, oh, everything is so modern, everything is just so well organized. But underneath the surface, China is still a very developing country. So you will find that in certain circumstances, in certain places, things just don't always work that well as you might expect them to work. So one of the most important things that I always say to people is, if you go to China, don't expect things to go the way they do at home, because they won't. On the other hand, I do have to mention that sometimes things can go much faster and much smoother than they do at home. The Chinese people are very pragmatic, and I've always been very impressed how they can make things happen at the last moment, where we in the West would say, well, we cannot plan this. It's too little time to do this. They do pull it off. So sometimes you have an advantage, sometimes you have a disadvantage, but be prepared that things will go different than they do at home. So, especially if you have to do with people that work in the service industry. Now, like I said, Chinese people can be very pragmatic, but it doesn't always mean that they actually always want to be very flexible and very pragmatic. You will often find that they use the term 没办法. 没办法literally means there is no way. And basically what they try to say is, I cannot get this done for you. There's no possible way to do this. While between the lines, what they actually want to say is, yeah, we could do that, but I don't really want to do that because I might be held responsible if things go wrong. So a lot of people, in the service industry, a lot of service workers worry about getting blamed for things going wrong, and therefore they stick basically to the manual. So you'll find that in China quite often, and you'll just have to find a way to deal with that. A couple of examples from my own experience. One time we arrived with a group at a hotel. We had to hand in our passports, because when you go to a hotel, they need to scan your passport because they need to send that information to the local police office. It's something that they are required to do by law. But we also wanted to go out of the hotel, and it was during a time where there was a lot of security because of the 70th anniversary of the People's Republic. So there were security checks everywhere. So I told our group, you definitely need to have your passport. But they couldn't get it back. Why not? Because our Chinese tour guide that was traveling with us was out, and he had handed in the passports. And the service worker, the receptionist, didn't want to give the passports back to any other person than our own local tour guide. Even when I said, well, look at the passport, look at this guy. I mean, that's him. That's his face on the passport. They didn't really want to give that. So that's a very clear example of 没办法. There's no way. I don't want to be responsible for this. Another example is that we arrived at a metro station, and the bus with our luggage was actually outside at the entry of the metro station. But we were not allowed to go through security check to get our luggage from the entry, because it was an entry. It was not an exit. And the security people said, you cannot do that. You will have to go out all the way around the back and go there. And so we almost missed our train from Shanghai to Beijing. But that's the things that you'll have to deal with in China. Another thing is that the government can all of a sudden change the rules. So you might want to go, for instance, to a restaurant, or you might want to have a meal delivered, And what we experienced is that the restaurants just closed because of the 70th anniversary festivities. And not on that specific day, no, a week before, because they were also sort of rehearsing those things. So the restaurant owners had to close their restaurants. The food delivery guys were not allowed to pick up food and deliver it anymore. So you might get very annoyed by this, but do realize that the restaurant owners and those food couriers, they don't like it either, and they are losing their money. You're just losing a meal in that specific restaurant. So again, try to also see things from another side and try to be flexible. So this is things that can happen in the cities, but if you go outside of the big cities, things get progressively less developed. So the transport, even though you might zip through the countryside in a high-speed rail train with 300 kilometers per hour, once you get off the train station, you might be in a very tiny minibus. And that minibus won't go until the minibus is completely filled, because otherwise it will cost the driver, that's basically renting, or that's his minibus, it will cost the driver too much fuel per passenger. So on one hand, you get off the high-speed rail, a very high developed part of the infrastructure in China, and you're immediately again back to the very, very basics. So I always advise people that if budget is not an issue, get a private car. Now, to give you an example, we traveled to Guizhou one time, and we actually calculated quite a lot of time to go back from our destination to a local hub for the local buses, and from there to the high-speed rail station. But the bus didn't turn up, and we had waited for an hour. And when it finally turned up, there were so many people waiting that we actually had to fight for a spot on the bus, just sort of trying to get in as soon as possible, or as the first person. And we only got on the train like about 5 minutes before it departed. So we had nearly missed it. And that, for me, I'm a bit of a control freak, that's a very stressful situation, but you do have to take that into account and be prepared for it. So I also always say, don't plan things too tightly. We have like the tendency to get a lot of things crammed into one specific day and go to all of these different places. But you just need more time in China. Like I said, sometimes things can go fast, and other times you can get caught up in traffic jams or have other unexpected hold-ups. You might also, when you have a business meeting, unexpectedly be invited for dinner or for lunch. And you definitely should not reject that, because you might have had a very good meeting, you think, but most of the relationship building takes place in those dinners. And maybe afterwards when you go to KTV, as you've heard in some of the other lessons. So always be prepared to completely change your schedule and your agenda, and be flexible and go with the flow when these kinds of opportunities present themselves. So you should be prepared for pleasant surprises, but also unpleasant surprises and annoyances. One time we arrived in the hotel and we were actually quickly going to put our stuff in our rooms and then head out with the whole group for some fun at KTV, at karaoke. But we had to cancel that whole idea because the registration system in the hotel had broken down and we couldn't actually go to our room. So we ended up with a plan B. We ended up in the bar of the hotel and we still had a good time, and we just moved that karaoke session to the next evening. So again, be flexible. You can have traffic jams on the way to the airport, so don't leave too close to your actual flight. And also, especially in China, be prepared for delays. Your flight is quite often delayed because the military, the Air Force, the Chinese Air Force, can cancel flights if they want to use that airspace. And that happens quite often. Also, one specific time, I had to go to this tiny little town called Huaihua for a flight from a small a very small airport there. And just as I had arrived, after being on a bus for 3 hours, at the bus station I got an email from ChinaTextTrip that my flight was cancelled. So I called them up and I said, so when's the next flight? And they said, well, we can arrange the next flight for you. No problem, no problem. I said, yeah, but when is it? In 3 days. And I said, I'm not staying here in the middle of nowhere for 3 days. I mean, there's nothing to do here, and I've got other things to do. So I actually ended up again with a plan B, where I got on the high-speed rail to the provincial capital, and from there to my destination. I did lose half a day, but losing half a day is better than 3 days. So I found a different way out. So again, have a plan B and maybe even a plan C. Now, when things go wrong, just count to 10. Breathe in, be a bit zen, like I said. Take some Chinese tea, it will calm you down. Because getting upset quite often doesn't really help. So be flexible and try taking things with a smile. As I'll show you in a couple of minutes, a lot of these things turn into very good stories later on. Also, beware that if you get very angry with people, you can not only cause a loss of face for yourself, but also for the person you're very angry with. Now, having said that, you will quite often see that Chinese people also get very upset with some of the service staff. So always take the whole loss of face thing with a grain of salt. If it's somebody that they don't personally know, you will definitely see Chinese people getting very angry. But try not to be that foreigner that gets angry with the Chinese staff. Always remember you're a guest in their country. And like I said, it often makes for great stories. And I'll sort of close off with one very good story. So I was working in China in a Chinese NGO, and I was living in a very small, tiny Chinese apartment. And one day, I think about 3 months after I had arrived in the city of Xi'an, I went home, I opened the door to my apartment, and it was filled with smoke. Now, of course, I was very worried. So I looked around if something was burning there. It's a very tiny apartment, so it only took me about a minute. Nothing was burning. But then I remembered, sometimes I get these cooking smells from other apartments that maybe came in through the ventilation system. So I thought maybe somewhere else there's something burning. So maybe one of the other rooms is on fire. So I went downstairs and I had learned a bit of Chinese. So I said, 你说英语吗? Do you speak English? To the receptionist, because the building I was in was both an apartment building, but also some floors were rented out by a hotel. So we had a receptionist actually. And I said, do you speak English? And she said, 一点点. So a tiny bit, a little. So I said, there is smoke in my room. And she said, yes. And I said, what yes? She said, yes, you can smoke in your room. I said, no. I said, you don't understand. There is smoke in my room. Fire. There's fire. And she said, oh, wait. And she went away and she came back and she gave me a lighter. Fire. She smiled at me. I said, no, you don't understand. There's somewhere a fire. Something's burning. I said, come to my room. And then she started looking very worried and she said, oh, 等一下, wait a moment. And she got a colleague to accompany me back to my apartment. We opened the door. Most of the smoke had already cleared out because I also opened up a window. And he walked in, he looked around, he took a sniff. He said, maybe. And then he left and I never saw the guy again. So these are things that might have you worried, but they make for an excellent, very, very good story later on. So, again, my point is here that don't expect things to always go smoothly. Plan for that, have a plan B, have a plan C. And also, you've taken this course, you've taken this video course, and we try to put a lot of information in. But things constantly change. Especially in China, things change all the time. So something we might make today, which is very informatic and theoretical, might not be completely true or valid by the time you see it. We try to avoid these mistakes, and you can also find a lot of maybe more up-to-date information in the PDFs that we provide for this, but also be warned that whatever you read and whatever you see, it might not be totally up-to-date. Just like that day when I took the Lonely Planet and I looked up how we could get to the Summer Palace in Beijing, and they said you need to go to that metro station, get off, take a bus for an hour, and then you'll arrive at the Summer Palace, which we did. And when we actually got there, we found out that the bus stopped right in front of a brand new metro station. And we only had, instead of being on the bus for an hour, we had to, if we only had like stayed on the metro for 2 extra stations, we would have been right at our destination. But the Lonely Planet was a year old, only a year old, so didn't take that into account. So, as I said, things change, be prepared for this, and have your Chinese tea, relax, and you'll have a whole lot of more fun than just getting upset over all of the small things that you will experience on your adventure. Thank you. Bye.